Turkey's military operation in Syria on pause. Ankara and Washington reach a deal to stop the advance of Turkish forces in northeastern Syria. Trump calls it a great day for civilization. Is it ultimately a triumph for Turkey? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is the suspension of Operation Peace Spring. Turkey has agreed to suspend hostilities in northeastern Syria following an American delegation's visit to Ankara. Under an agreed deal, the YPG has been given 5 days to leave a proposed safe zone. And if they don't, the military operation will resume. Many see it as a strategic victory for Ankara, which seems set to achieve its objective of repelling the PKK's offshoot from its border with Syria. But while Ankara celebrates, so too might the Syrian regime and its ally Russia. As US troops pulled out, Russian forces stepped in, with Moscow seemingly gaining greater influence in Syria. Could this have an impact on the deal's implementation? Adam Pletz reports.
Mr. President, welcome.
Against expectations, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and American Vice President Mike Pence have struck a deal halting Turkey's Peace Spring military operation in northeastern Syria.
We will pause Operation Peace Spring in order to allow for the withdrawal of PKK-YPG forces from the safe zone for 120 hours. Not a ceasefire, we are only pausing. This is not a ceasefire. Ceasefires can be done only between two legitimate sides. We are only pausing the operation to allow the terrorist groups, which are the targets of the operation, withdrawal from the safe zone.
The YPG, which was allied with the US in the fight against Daesh, seemed to have agreed to the withdrawal.
Our administration has already been in contact with Syrian Defense Forces, and we have already begun to facilitate their safe withdrawal from the nearly 20-mile wide safe zone area south of the Turkish border in Syria.
Washington says it will drop sanctions against Turkey as soon as a permanent ceasefire is in effect. But US lawmakers say Congress will push to impose its own. If the YPG does not fully withdraw from the designated safe zone or retains its heavy weaponry, Turkey says it will resume its operation. Turkey has called the deal a diplomatic success. If the agreement holds, President Erdogan will have secured his stated goals.
Münbiş'ten Irak sınırına kadar olan hat boyunca istisnasız bir şekilde 30-35 kilometrelik bir derinliği kontrol altına aldık. İşte o zaman harekatımız sona erer. Bu hedefe ulaşana kadar hiçbir güç bizi durduramaz.
President Trump is also claiming a victory.
I sent Vice President Pence and Secretary of State Pompeo to lead an American delegation to meet with President Erdogan of Turkey. They got there today and it did work. Without spilling a drop of American blood, not one drop of American blood.
But is this really a win-win solution? Or has the US signed away its influence in Syria? Adam Pletz, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now in Savannah, Georgia, is Brett Velicovich. He's a former US Army Special Operations Intelligence Analyst. And in New York is the president of the Turkish Heritage Organization, Ali Cinar. Samuel Ramani is a researcher at Oxford University, specializing in Russian and Middle Eastern foreign policy and diplomacy. Good to have you all on the program, gentlemen. Ali Cinar, let's start with you. Is this a victory for Turkey?
I think so. It's a diplomatic success for Turkey because Turkey was looking for YPG and PKK removed from the safe zone, which is 20 miles. And Turkey would like to see YPG, PKK elements to be removed as well from the safe zone. So whatever Turkey asked from United States, Turkey got it. And this 4 hours meeting with Mike Pence and President Erdogan, it was a long meeting, but overall, I think Turkey achieved this mission. And this 120 hours is very important because now United States has to keep the promises. Otherwise, the operation will continue. It's not a ceasefire. There is a misinformation from the US side, but Turkey insisting that United States has to keep the promises and make sure that YPG and PKK removed from the safe zone. Otherwise, Turkey will continue the operation. So overall, I think it was a success for Turkey. Whatever Turkey asked, Turkey got.
Brett Velicovich, is the United States in a position to actually keep that promise? Because it relies on the US having an influence of people who feel betrayed by them. Does it actually have the ability to get the YPG to put down its weapons and to shift further back?
No, it's a great point because I think we are losing alliances in that region at a time when we need them the most. But when I look at this deal, it seems like it was more designed to be a political talking point from our politicians here in the United States than to actually accomplish much. And, it seemed like, for one, it appeared to secure Turkey most with its military objectives. It did. First of all, the deal didn't even clearly define what the boundary is of this safe zone. And so now we forced our Kurdish allies to have to basically cede territory to Turkey. So I see it as a major win for Turkey in general, but I imagine that our Kurdish allies have got to be upset, especially ones that are sitting there in Kobani that are seeing their villages and families be destroyed. I can't imagine that they're just going to give that up overnight and leave.
Samuel Ramani, how has this adjusted, shifted, changed the current dynamic in northern Syria?
I think that much depends on the commitments and the willingness of both sides to follow through on them. Even today, there's been reported attempts of escalations between both sides. And if you listen to the Kurdish leader who was interviewed by The Guardian earlier today, he was very adamantly saying that the Kurds are not going to give up their homeland, they're not going to give up northern Syria, and they're not going to be deterred by external aggression from Turkey or by the US withdrawing. So I have a great reason to doubt that the YPG and the PKK will necessarily withdraw on schedule. I think that there's a very real chance, that should not be overlooked, that the offensive could continue. And I agree with the overall sentiment here that the United States has lost a great deal of leverage over the Kurds, and there's been a major breach of trust. Clearly, the Kurds thought they were going to be able to gain suzerainty over a certain area of northern Syria, secure autonomy in Rojava because of what they did to fight ISIS, and now that goal has been set aside and they've been abandoned. The only thing that might keep the Kurds in line is the fact that while they have many people expressing sympathy with them and against Turkey in Europe and in the Arab world, there are very few countries that are actually providing them any kind of material support or any kind of actual diplomatic assistance. So that might cause them to toe in line. But I think that there's a very realistic chance that in 5 days' time, we could be looking at a resumption of Operation Peace Spring.
And so, Ali Cinar, what will it take do you think, for Turkey to decide, well, listen, the Americans are not keeping up their end of the bargain, and we're going to continue and finish this off? Is it a minor skirmish? Is it a rocket from the YPG? What's going to be that breaking point or that defining line to say we have to go back to square one and continue with the operation?
So what Turkish Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu said that this 5 days is very critical for the agreement. Otherwise, Turks will continue for the operation. At the same time, Vice President Pence also indicated that YPG start to remove from the safe zone area. So it seems like the process has already launched and started, but Turks are closely monitoring the situation. At the same time, of course, the Russian influences are another one. President Erdogan will be meeting President Putin on October 22nd. So this will be also a critical meeting in order to understand what will be the situation in the region, because YPG was already working with Russians too. I mean, there's a misunderstanding because YPG has an office in Moscow. Russia doesn't recognize PKK as a terrorist organization. So from the beginning, Russians were working with Assad, Iran, and YPG. So there are different complex elements in this right now. So, but as I said, Turks will closely monitoring the situation to make sure YPG and PKK elements removed from the safe zone area.
Right. So, Brett, Ali Cinar pointing out that tactically over the years there have been all sorts of shape-shifting alliances, including, the YPG and the Russians. The Russian special forces have moved in. The regime, Assad's regime, has moved back into territory that it had lost over the past few years. Does that grate with you? How do you feel about that Assad and the Russians are moving in where the Americans shifted out from?
Well, it's a major problem. And let me first say, in terms of the ceasefire, from my perspective, the ceasefire has already been broken by the Turkish side, because we're already seeing just this morning the Free Syrian Army, which is backed by the Turkish government, firing on civilians. So it seems like it's already been broken. But what is concerning me the most is not simply just that we've got our number one surrogate force, the Kurds, taking their eyes off our number one enemy, ISIS, and going basically right into the arms of Russia. But my concern is this massive ISIS prisoner problem that we now have. And we have a situation where members of the Free Syrian Army have allegiance, in some cases, to ISIS. So how are we to expect that they're going to be able to contain these prisons and not set the conditions for another military force to have to go in there and basically stop ISIS again? And when I think about the Russia situation, Vladimir Putin, he's got to be just laughing right now, because not only, again, have we taken our number one ally and basically put them right into their arms by allowing them the Kurds to make a deal with Russia to bring forces to stop this Turkish advance, but at the same time, we've had to sanction a NATO ally in Turkey. So the people who are really winning from all this is Russia. But again, my concern is overall this ISIS prisoner problem. And then on top of that, this manifestation of a humanitarian crisis that I'm starting to see that really concerns me, with civilians being caught in the crossfire.
Okay, so let me ask Ali Cinar about one of the points that you brought up there. You said the Free Syrian Army, right? Ali, what Brett's referring to, what is known nowadays more ubiquitously as the SNA, or Syrian National Army, made up of fighters who are not Turkish fighters, former Free Syrian Army, a lot of Syrians, some others as well. He's hanging a question mark over whether they can be trusted. I mean, within this operation and beyond. Do you accept that criticism?
I don't. I totally disagree. I mean, when we look at Turkey's position working with the Free Syrian Army, they are more disciplined and they listen to the Turkish army. I mean, we see it. But unfortunately, as President Erdogan this morning said, there's a misinformation going on. Turks is keeping their promises. There is no attack from the Turkish side or operation. But however, YPG, PKK, and I don't call Kurds, they are a terrorist organization, which also recognized by James Jeffrey and other US military officials. So we need to separate who are the real Kurds and who Turkey is fighting against for. So the Syrian Free Army, I think, is right now more professional acting when we compare from the other operations. Regarding the Daesh, Turkish Defense Ministry already released the videos for the prison that they were captured a few days ago. YPG and PKK released them. Even President Trump tweeted and said YPG and PKK are using United States pull in us, threatening the Daesh incident. So I think Turks, also I want to highlight that Turkey got 14 attacks from ISIS past 2-3 years. 304 civilians lost their lives, over 1,000 people wounded. So Turkey, the NATO ally, was the most attacked by ISIS. So when we talk about ISIS or Daesh, Turkey suffered more than other NATO allies. I think we have to be more realistic what we are talking here.
Okay, I want us to have.
Why is Turkey?
Go ahead, Brett.
What I don't understand then is, why is Turkey focusing, what seems to be focusing solely on the YPG? We're only hearing about Kurdish forces being killed. We've had zero information, at least in the U.S., indicating Turkey's put even a moment of focus on ISIS. We haven't heard about any ISIS prisoners being captured. We haven't heard about any ISIS fighters being stopped. They're all over the region. You've got tens of thousands of fighters still out there, but we're only hearing about PKK and YPG
Brett,
forces.
The president speaking earlier, he said 195, if I'm not mistaken. He said 195 were caught very recently, and I want to go a bit deeper into that. Ali, you're going to get a chance to respond to this in a second, right? But I want to kind of step back a little bit, because President Erdogan, speaking earlier, had given us a bit of a history lesson, said this didn't come from nowhere, and this has been a long time coming, right? Where the Turkish state wanted to do something about the YPG-PKK problem along its border, and he brought this up with President Obama. Let's have a listen.
At the 2016 G20 summit that we held in our country, I proposed the Safe Zone project's leaders. And despite the fact they were all in agreement in principle, no one took concrete steps. And during that time, Mr. Obama was the President of the United States, and I talked to him as well. Following Operation Olive Branch, we brought attention to the subject yet again. We also held certain activities with the Americans, but unfortunately we could not ensure the developments that we were hoping for.
Okay, so Samuel Ramani, as we look at the geopolitics of this, right, should we be more forgiving to Barack Obama when we look at the context and say, well, 2016, Daesh was not defeated then. You had the YPG still fighting them on the ground. That's why Obama didn't really want to listen to President Erdogan. Or was Barack Obama the reason we're in this situation right now? Which interpretation is more correct, Samuel?
I think that there is a long history that kind of relates back to this. And first of all, it kind of ties back to the Adana Agreement. Even in the 1990s, when the Syrian civil war started, the Americans and the Obama administration were quite happy with the status quo, where the Kurds got autonomy in Rojava, and Assad's forces would be in controlling the rest of Syria, but then they would be trying to overthrow them from there. And I think that definitely, yes, the priority for the U.S. administration was to find a reliable fighting force against ISIS. And there was an increasing concern that the Free Syrian Army, some other brigades were getting too close to al-Nusra, and they were getting too close to Islamic extremist movements and ISIS. And the Kurds, because of their commitment to secularism, because of their joint desire to overthrow Assad, and also combat ISIS, were the natural surrogates, the natural proxies that they could latch onto. So I think that as the war against ISIS was coming, the concern was that if Erdogan or Turkey were to launch an attack on this, then it would jeopardize the whole counterterrorism mission. And I think that there also was an issue with the Syrian government's role here too. In particular, the Turks called for Assad to go, and Assad had basically violated the Adana Agreement and proceeded to engage with the YPG and the PKK, and the Obama administration did nothing about that. So there has been, even though it was against Assad, so there's been many different ways. First of all, in the fight against ISIS, and second, against Assad's working with the YPG, and Russia's working with the YPG, where Obama was incredibly lax and ineffective in this regard.
And Brett, now the Americans are leaving, ultimately, getting out of the mess. Trump sells it to his base, and others are saying this is not our problem. I mean, he even suggested, there's a lot of sand in the Middle East. Let the Kurds and the Turks just play with the sand and fight it out, 2 kids in a lot and so on, right? That's ultimately the foreign policy here. Tell me why that might not be better than, well, the failures of the past decade anyway. It's not as if the United States was a positive influence, was it?
Well, look, the issue here is that we aren't learning from our mistakes. I think that's why there are so many people upset in the U.S. about this, not just from typical opponents of the president, but allies of the president are upset by this decision, because there were those of us in the trenches of the Iraq War that were telling Barack Obama the same exact thing that people are telling President Trump right now. We have to learn from our history, and it was a major mistake to pull out our forces. And what we did was, at the same time, we were trying to manage the situation and even get the Kurds to remove some of their forces from the Turkish border. And we got them to pull back in hopes that it would stop the Turks from coming into Syria. And basically what we did was we just rolled out a red carpet for this incursion to take place. And so I'm more concerned about us not learning from history. Right now, it looks like a great thing for Turkey to go in there from their perspective and conduct this operation under the guise that it's some sort of peaceful operation. But years down the road, we're going to find out that this was a major mistake, because we've created more instability in the region. We've allowed this humanitarian crisis to manifest itself. And take it from somebody who spent a lot of time at war. This is a major mistake, because you're going to see the consequences of this years down the road.
Okay, Ali Cinar, 2 parts to this, right? So the first part was clearing a terror threat. Turkey considers the YPG, the sister organization of the PKK, a terrorist organization that undermines its national security. It needs to clear the terror threat on the border. The other part of this was, once the safe zone is established, to facilitate the return of millions of Syrian refugees back home, as Turkey puts it. Why would those Syrian refugees, Ali, want to go back there now if Assad is in control of the territory, the very same person they were running away from?
It's a good question, but when we look overall, Turkey is hosting 3.6 million Syrian refugees, and 400,000 are the Syrian Kurds. When we look at Turkey's previous operations, including Afrin operation, 320,000 Syrian refugees went back to their homeland. So we see that examples, we see that success story from the previous operation. I mean, many Syrian refugees wants to go back to safe zone area because they are coming from Syria. So that's why Turkey's mission is have them go back to their homeland country. And regarding the border, Turkey was attacked by YPG and PKK many times, Hatay, Antep, and other cities. And with these attacks, over 50 citizens were killed. I mean, that's why Turkey is having these operations to make sure there is a safe zone over 32 kilometers. And YPG, PKK are linked. They are using the tunnels, also having the weapons bringing to Turkey. And remember, we have 40,000 Turkish citizens killed past 40 years. So because of the nation's security, Turkey is not only fighting against ISIS, and also I want to highlight that Turkey neutralized over 3,000 ISIS fighters in Syria with these operations. So YPG, PKK, Daesh, or ISIS, all terrorist groups that Turkey were fighting against them. So I think United States should work with NATO ally. I mean, I agree with Brett. I think Turkey and US should work together. United States troops should not go back to country, United States. They should stay in Syria, but working with Turkey. Otherwise, Iran also, we are forgetting this issue. Iran is the biggest threat actually in this Syria
and
problem.
I'm glad you brought up the Iranians, and that's probably for another discussion because that's opening up a Pandora's box. But Brett, let me ask you about the carrot and stick here when it comes to American diplomacy on this issue, right? So when we look at the laundry list of things here, right? There were tensions over the Halkbank case, Turkey choosing the Russian S-400s and being kicked out of the F-35 fighter jet program. That's a tension with the United States. Then we have the sanctions, right? Senate legislation would sanction top Turkish officials, restrict visa access to the U.S., mandate an investigation into President Erdogan's personal finances, impose fines on U.S. investors from buying Turkish sovereign debt, and so on and so forth. The president literally threatening to destroy the Turkish economy. We have all of this, and yet, as you say, Turkey still gets a better deal out of this. So what's going on?
Well, I think with the sanctions, the president realized that he had made a mistake by essentially authorizing Turkey and Erdogan to go in there. And so immediately he was forced to come up with some sort of solution to appease Republicans in the U.S. here to do something about it. And so he threw out the sanctions. But in my opinion, the sanctions aren't going to stop Turkey from doing what they have to do in the near term at all. And so, yes, the president is threatening to destroy the economy. I don't think behind the scenes he actually means that, though, because Turkey is an ally of ours. We need Turkey to be our friends as well. So it's a very delicate situation because at the same time we're trying to balance the stability of a region that was finally seeming to kind of come back together after we took down the larger caliphate. And at the same time, we need to appease a NATO ally. I mean, it's odd to me that we're sanctioning a NATO ally, but at the same time, I don't think the president feels like he has many other options. I mean, this is going back to the fact that we've taken now our number one ally in the Kurds, and we've shifted their focus against our number one enemy. Who else do we have in the region that's there to support us? And so we can't keep unraveling these alliances that we've had over the years, or it's only going to make the situation worse. And I just think the president feels that this is the only thing that can be done. We're not going to send forces to repel the Turkish advance. We would never do that. That would be a major mistake, and the American public would absolutely not allow it. So I think that behind the scenes, there's this delicate balance of how do we still play nice with Turkey, but at the same time slow down the situation to where we're not seeing this major humanitarian crisis play out.
Samuel Ramani, I've got less than a minute left on the program. Has this entire episode, as it unfolds, shown us that American power in the Middle East is being reduced, and others, Ankara, the Kremlin, and so on, are having their power increased? Very briefly, please.
Well, I think that this episode basically shows that the United States is not willing to stick up and can be erratic in being loyal to its non-treaty allies. And from that regard, Russia will sell that narrative to show that it's a stable and safe pair of hands. And we already saw that in his trips to Riyadh and Abu Dhabi. I think I agree with the other presenters too here that Turkey did achieve its main goals and looked as if the U.S. was making a lot of unilateral concessions to Ankara. So yes, I would agree with the thrust of that statement overall.
Okay. Samuel Ramani, Brett Velicovich, and Ali Cinar. Pleasure having you all on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much.